Welcome to Tesla, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, man, as you guys know, I'm an Astros fan. And we are in the playoffs. We just got the first game in the books. The Astros won. Barely. But a win is a win, even if it's by an inch or a mile. Anyways, man, you guys know we got the U.S. Championships going on right now. So I did go to round 5, and I grabbed the game Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley. So this is them shaking hands before the historic, record-setting game. No, I'm playing. But yes, for all my people in the Philippines, I would say mabuhay to you. Kamusta na aking makaibigan. Masaya akong makita kang muli. Hello ulit. I appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. So much, man. Magandang hapon to you guys. It is not quite super afternoon yet, but, we getting there. But if you guys are ready to go, man, let's take a look and see what we got for this game, homie. We got the move E4. Best by test, as Bobby Fischer used to say. E5. Knight comes to F3. Knight to C6. Bishop to B5. Knight goes to F6. And then we do see the move castles, which might look kind of curious to some of you guys that are not familiar with the Ruy Lopez, the Berlin defense. You're just thinking, man, wait a minute. Am I just giving away a pawn for nothing? No. After knight takes E4, you normally have two different options that you employ. It's either rook to E1 or the move D4. So in the game, we see rook to E1, and knight goes up to D6, and then we do see knight taking E5, and being very careful here to go bishop to E7. You definitely do not want to say, man, you know what? This bishop looks mighty tasty. Knight takes B5, and then knight takes C6 with check. No, you have to pull an Eric Rosen. Oh, no, my queen. Yeah. The queen is bye-bye because there's nowhere the queen can go, and you have to deal with this check right here. So that is all she wrote. Shake hands and go home. So we do see the move bishop down to F1. Knight takes E5, rook takes E5. Castles by black. We got knight up to C3, knight to E8. And it is now that a journey for a particular piece starts. And that is this knight on C3. We got the move knight to D5. We got bishop going to D6. Tickling the rook because the rook is like undefended and it's super ticklish, so it has to move. So rook goes to E1. We got the move C6, and we have to move this knight another time. Knight goes to E3. Bishop back to E7, and then knight jumps up to to F5. Like, bro, I'm going to keep moving, homie. So we got the move bishop to G5. We got the move D3. Bishop takes C1. Queen takes C1. And then we do see the move D5. And then we have yet another move by the knight. Knight goes to E7 with check, which isn't anything that's crazy scary. You got king going over to H8. Then you have knight taking C8. And then rook taking C8. But like I said, what a journey. That was like 6 knight moves. And it's crazy because white is just slightly better than black is. You think black would just be demolishing the game at this point with all those knight moves. But we do see the move G3, and this is the novelty of the game. It makes some sense. I mean, it's just creating future luft. You do have a light squared bishop, so you're not really worried about all these weaknesses that you just opened up around your king. So you're good to go. We got the knight going to F6. We got the move C4. We got the move C5. Queen goes to F4. We got the move B6. And then rook 8 comes to D1. And of course, black does not want to capture here, and then captures, and then the queen is, kind of on pre-ish. So we do see the move queen to C7, just attacking this queen over here. You don't really want to give up the queen on this square because you're going to be severely damaging your pawn structure. And then you got some ugly double pawns, man. You don't even want to do that, bro. So we got queen taking C7, rook taking C7, D4, pawn takes D4, pawn takes D5 first, knight takes D5, or rook takes D4, and then we do have the knight coming back to F6. And one of black's main things that they're working on trying to do is trying to prevent white from penetrating on the 7th rank. Because if they can get their rooks to the 7th rank, then you do have 2 pigs on the 7th. And as you guys might or might not be aware, 2 pigs on the 7th are really hard. Let me see. I got my light kind of messing me up a little bit here. Okay, no, I'm good. Because I'm kind of shiny right now. Probably because I got the hat on or whatever. But I got my hat backwards, man. So I'm going to wear the Astros jersey during the playoffs. And I'll just be switching my hats around, making it look kind of nice. But anyways, like I said, if you can get 2 pigs on the 7th as white, you would be pretty much dominating the entire game. So we cannot allow that to happen if we're black. So we do see the rook going up to D6. That's about the best you can do in this particular case because the 7th rank is covered. The king does go over to G8. We do have B3. We got the rook F to C8. And then we do have bishop over to A6. And you see this bishop, comes with a little oomph, right? You're attacking here. And so the initial thing that we do is go rook down to C1, because it's like, if you're going to take my rook, I'm going to take your rook. So we do see the rook D coming back down to D1. We got rook taking D1, rook taking D1, and then the rook goes over to E8. And of course, as I was mentioning to you guys before, you do still want to get on the 7th. So we see the move rook to C1 by Fabi. Just saying, bro, I want to try to get on the 7th rank somewhere, bro. Because even if you don't have 2 rooks, you can get one of the rooks up here, then you'll be sitting pretty, sitting pretty nice. So the king does come over to F8, make sure there's no back rank issues. The king comes up to G2. We got the move G5, and then we have the move rook to C7. And the move G5 is actually a very interesting move, because if we can actually get G4 in, I mean, that kind of super freezes all of these pawns in place, because it would be kind of undesirable to be pushing these pawns while there's a pawn right here. So, there's definitely some, some ideas behind doing that. But like I said, the rook does come to C7. The rook goes to E7 because that A7 pawn was kind of looking scrumptious. So we do see rook taking E7, king taking E7, and then we do have the move king up to F3. And the one thing about this particular situation is if the move G4 did come, that would allow the king to step up. And then there's not really a whole lot that's preventing the king from getting to F5. That is just actually way too much of a dominant, position for white to have. So we do not see black do that. We do see the move king going over to D6. But that does allow bishop down to C4, and that pawn on F7 is a little bit lonely. So you guys always hear me talk about this pawn on F2 and F7. It doesn't matter who you're playing. It doesn't matter what point of the game that you're coming to. F2 and F7 is always something that you should take into consideration for sure. So we got the move A5. And then the bishop does just capture this pawn on F7 and say, hey, bro, I got me a pawn, homie. So, I mean, what are you going to do about it? But if we back up, after we saw king taking D7 and king coming up to F3, we did see the move king to D6 in this position, right? But something else that definitely could have been tried that would have kind of liberated black just a little bit more is the move actually knight to D5. Bishop to C4 is going to be coming. So it would be in this position that the knight would come down to C3. And then after the move A4, you actually have the move F5. And the good thing about it is, I mean, you're restricting black a lot here. So you guys can see that this position, I mean, is a little bit better. And you do have your pawn. So, I mean, that was something that, could have possibly happened. But like I said, we did see bishop taking F7. We got king coming down to E5. We got the move A4. And this light thing is actually kind of bothering me, though. If I'm going to be honest, I'll have to move back some. Okay, let me try to... Because I'm not trying to have a whole bunch of light going on. Let me just... maybe do that. Do I look super cool? This might make a difference. Yeah, anyway, I'm gonna just, yeah, something, man. All right, anyways, man, forgive me. But I do have the move king down D4, and we do have the move bishop to C4. And this bishop is actually pretty nifty, man. It's like holding this whole pawn chain down over here. Everything is everything and stuff like that. So, I mean, white actually has a really nice position, though. But can you make it a win? Can Fabi force that bad boy through? So we got the move H6, we got the move H4, we got king back up to E5, pawn takes G5, pawn takes G5, and we do have king over to E3. We got knight down to G4, and this can be just like a touch annoying because, I mean, it's like, the knight is going to keep trying to go back and forth. It's going to try to knock this king away because it's trying to grab this little pawn over here on F2. Remember I just said F2, F7. We got the king coming down to E2, we got the king coming down to D4, which might look kind of scary, but like I said, that bishop is anchored. The bishop goes up to B5. We got knight coming up to F6. King going to F3. And then we do have the king going up to E5. We got king over to E3. We got knight to G4. We check with that same thing back again. We're like, bro, why you nagging me, bro? The king goes down to E2. The king goes back to D4. We got bishop up to C6. We're trying to vary. Fabi's like, bro, I got a nice position. I mean, it's not like it's absolutely won, but I do have a pawn going on. So, I mean, I'm trying to see, what I can try to drum up, right? The knight goes to E5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes back to B5. We got knight to G4 again, and then we have the move F3. So that whole little maneuver with knight to G4 is not going to work anymore. So we do have the knight going down to E3, and the only thing about it is, man, I mean, these dark squares are actually kind of weak, man. With the support of this king, this knight really has the ability to kind of jump around anywhere it wants to, as far as dark squares are concerned, because you do have a light square bishop. So, I mean, you're going to see the knight hopping and hippity hopping and everywhere. So this is like a super duper knight hippy hoppy game right now. So we do see the move a bishop down to d3. We got knight up to d5. We got king over to d2. Knight goes to f6. We got bishop to g6. Knight to d5. We got bishop up to f7. Knight goes to f6. We got king to e2. Knight to d7. And Wesley So has thought about a certain type of maneuver that he can probably try to do. We got the move bishop back to g8, and then we have the move knight to c5. And they're like, okay, we're putting a little bit of pressure on this b3 pawn right now, right? For the moment, this bishop is holding the pawn, but, you know, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, things can get kind of crazy. So what we actually see in the position by Fabi is the move king to d2. So, I mean, as you guys know, it takes the opposition away from the king, and you are trying to make sure the king doesn't really get any penetration going on, right? Because like I said, this pawn is a little something, something, right? But if we back up, after we see the knight going to c5, I do pose a question to you. If we were to see the move king to f2, you have 3 possible king moves in this position. If you are black, what is a really, really good king move that you can make? Now, I'm going to give you the different options. You got king to e5, you got king over to c3, and you have king to d3. Which one would you choose, or which ones? If you want to go ahead and pause the video and try to guess what move you should play, go ahead and do so. Okay, cool. Yeah, one day I'm gonna upgrade this lighting situation. Like, it's kind of weird because like when I move, it gets light and it gets dark and stuff. You know, I'm gonna be like a billionaire one day, and I'm gonna have like a whole recording studio that I'm gonna record in, and y'all are gonna be like, man, he's like an extra professional these days. Anyways, so as I said, you guys got king to e5, you got king to d3, you got king to c3 that you can do. The problem is 2 of them are actually completely wrong and losing the game. There's only really one move that you can do. If you thought of the move king to e5, that would actually be completely losing. And to show you exactly why this is completely losing, you got the move king to e3. So what you have allowed by that king to e5 move is white to be able to take the opposition. The knight would have to jump somewhere. The king doesn't really have a whole lot that it can really do in this position. There's a bishop that's controlling light squares, and you have these pawn movings, right? You would see the bishop coming down to c4, the knight coming back to c5. You would see f4 check, pawn would take with check, and then the king would go to f5, and then king going over to d4. It might not look that crazy because you're like, man, wait a minute. Like, why am I moving to d4? I'm giving my pawn on. But the major idea in this situation is very relevant. After the king takes on f4, you got bishop up to f7, and then the knight has to go somewhere. Knight to a6, and then you got king up to d5. Now, you can always check on b4, but this king is going to be coming up and over, and it's going to be grabbing these pawns. And now you have 2 pawns to 0, and you are going to be completely winning the game. So that is the first one. If you did guess the move king down to c3 this way, because you're like, man, I'm gonna get this pawn, bro. Like, what's the problem? Like, what's going on, right? Well, that would actually be wrong as well, because the thing about the situation that you have to think about from an in-game perspective is the in-games where you have kings and you have pawns on 2 separate sides of the board, it makes it a little bit difficult to play, and you have to make sure that you are calculating correctly, because you kind of have to make sure that you stay in the middle of the board. You don't really want to go too far to one side of the board, because then you can have some runaway pawns on the other side of the board. The problem with king to c3 is, yes, it's going to be winning you some pawns, but it's actually going to be losing you the game. To give you an example, the king would come up to e3, oppose the king. Knight would take b3 if you did want to go the pawn taking route. Bishop would take b3, king would be taking b3, you got the move f4, pawn takes f4, pawn takes f4, and then you have a situation where kind of what do you do in this situation? You can't take this pawn because this pawn will promote. So you really don't have a whole lot that you can do in this particular situation. And this pawn is very, very fast, so that's completely losing. So backing up to what we had after the king came to f2, like I said, if you did guess king going down to d3, then you would be absolutely right. And this is the only way to hold this position. It might seem kind of strange, but you have to prevent this king from being able to come back into the position and either come up to one of these 2 squares, especially opposing the king. And this is the only way to hold everything down, because like I said, you have to make sure your king is continuing to be centralized, because if you give up central control, you will have a problem on one side of the board. The bishop would come to c4, possibly with check. The king would come back up to d4, and then the bishop back to f7. And you see that the position hasn't really changed much. This is the way that you try to hold the position. But going back to what we had in the game. Knight came to c5. We did see the move king to d2. We got the knight going back to d7. We got bishop down to h7. We got knight down to f6, bishop to g6. So you can see we've kind of started to repeat positions and stuff like that. You got the knight coming down to d5. You got king to e2. Knight goes to c3 with check. The king goes over to f2, similar to what we saw before. Knight goes to d1 with check. King goes down to e1. Knight goes back to c3. So you can see that neither side is really making a whole lot of progress. Like, there's not really a whole lot of progress to really do in this situation. We got the move f4. Pawn takes f4. Pawn takes f4. We got the move b5. Pawn takes b5. Knight takes b5. King goes up to f2. Knight goes down to c3. The king goes to f3. We got the move a4. Pawn takes a4. Knight takes a4. We got king going to g4. Knight going down to c3. Bishop going up to f7. The knight goes down to e2. And we have to push this pawn, because if we allow this knight to take this pawn, we have a completely lost endgame, because the bishop and the king by itself cannot force a checkmate. You can't even checkmate at all with that. We do have the move f5. The king goes up to e5. You got bishop down to c4 attacking this knight. And you have the really nice, interesting move, knight to f3, or knight to g3. Thinking, hey, man, if this king takes, I'm going to take this pawn. And like I said, you cannot checkmate with the bishop and a king. The king goes up to g5. You got knight taking f5. You got bishop going to d5. King taking d5. King taking f5. And you do have a draw by insufficient material. So, because this game was a draw, now I will say this. This is something I wanted to mention. When I mentioned this novelty way back here, the move g3, right? It's interesting because when we get all the way to the end of this game, in this particular position, this position has been reached like 6 times, where you've had just kings and you've gotten to this particular point. So you technically had a novelty, but at the end of the day, you kind of had more of a transposition into a known position. Well, probably at the end of the day, like, kings have been stuck on all of these squares. So, I mean, you can either say there's technically no true novelties, but that was pretty much the novelty the first time we had kind of seen the move g3. But what I was mentioning before, of course, you cannot checkmate with just lone kings, and they're just going to dance around the board forever. So that is all she wrote for that game. So I appreciate you guys very much for coming by. Maraming salamat aking makaibigan. Po sa nanonood ng aking mga video. Paalam, and I'll see you guys next time.